don't normally do warnings before my videos, but I'm doing one for this one because it is particularly difficult to listen to Peter's testimony. There are references to sexual assault, suicide, and a particularly difficult, harrowing life story. So I want you to take that under advisement before listening to it. In terms of the language used, it may seem a tiny bit confusing because of the references to being a detransitioner. Peter has a difference of sex development and was told that he was slotted into down the gender medicine pathway. So that's where the reference to detransition comes from. Hi, so I'm really excited today to have a fellow Scot with me today, and that always, tickles my fancy. This is a great guy called Peter, who is a detransitioner, who's got a really important story to tell. And this is obviously the first time that he's told this story. So Peter, you're very welcome. And I'm really looking forward to you unraveling from the start. So take us from the beginning about how this started for you in terms of your what point you got on this road.
I would have to go back to before I even had the consideration of the entire transgender, the entire transgender episode.
Yeah.
Now, my background from a childhood is not particularly happy.
Mm-hmm.
I was taken into care. I lived great long periods of my time with my grandparents as opposed to my natal family. When I left, because at that point at 16, that was you timed out of the care system.
Right.
Absolutely, no support. It is much better now. Not good enough, but it's much better. And as a 16, from a very, very strong religious background as well, suddenly on their own, in the big city, and it was overwhelming. Absolutely overwhelming. And at the same time, I was also dealing, in particular at 16, with the fact that I was like, oh my God, I'm gay.
Mm-hmm.
My family think that, well, my certain members of my family thought I would routinely say that, HIV or AIDS was God's punishment on the gays. Mm-hmm. And not to, going a bit further back, then I also grew up with the AIDS tombstone adverts.
Yeah.
So there is your background. So at that age, and what annoys me is still, even now that there is support to 18, it's not enough because you go seeking for comfort. Mm-hmm. And you're literally an open door for anyone who doesn't have your best interests at heart.
Yeah, to come and groom you, basically. Yeah.
And that's certainly that happened in a way that I went from one situation to another, none of it very good, but ultimately it led me to ending up in a relationship with someone who I, for a good portion of time, thought the absolute sun shines out of this guy. He's amazing. But in the course of that relationship, which I lost most of my friends because nobody approved. You can gather where my siblings were in my family with their views on gays. So this was it. And over the course of about 2 years, this person, not just the physical violence, but the absolute manipulation and it was like the daily name calling and the daily abuse. And it's funny, I heard someone the other day, that domestic abuse storyline on TV, it was awful cliche. And I actually wanted to scream because it's not cliche. That's what they're saying, although you might think that, oh, you're so fat and ugly, you couldn't get anyone else, and I'm the only one that's here. Where are your family when you need them? All these things. That's what these groomers, that these manipulators and these monsters say. And they're relying on that, and they are reliant on reducing your self-esteem. Now, during the course of that time, prior losing care, when I got to the puberty stage, any sign of puberty was very, very late. I showed zero signs of puberty until I was 15. That was something that was widely abused by adults prior to that. And because at the time there was no stable home at 15, it was foster care, it was all a mess. So it wasn't until I was actually older that I had gone to the doctor, I developed a problem, I'd gone to the doctor, and during the examination, he questioned me about various things, including what was it, obviously body shape difference. Now, even to now, after all this time, I'm still wearing baggy clothes that are nondescript because this is how much that affected. And yes, I do have, in terms of puberty, my voice never broke properly. It still hasn't. I didn't grow where I was meant to grow. What I did end up with was quite pronounced gynecomastia on my chest, and my physical body is very, very feminine. And there used to be jokes, and I've had the joke, oh no, you should have been a woman. You've got a better shape than I have. And then you tie that in with someone who is being an absolute monster to you. And I couldn't cope with that. I couldn't cope with it. I was sent for testing. It's quite in depth. It's not even now, there's not a huge number of specialists in the UK in terms of studying DSD conditions. But ultimately, I was diagnosed with Kleinfelter. And kind of, it's a bit blunt, this is what's wrong with you. We can give you testosterone, right? On you go. Just get your levels checked. And you can't, that's not something you can just say to someone. You might as well just turn around to someone and say, all right, you're going to die one day, go and have a good life. You can't do that. But unfortunately, that's what happens. And I used to think I was alone. I honestly used to think, I thought I'm the only person that's ever had to face this in these circumstances. And actual fact, now I know, in particular from people that I've met online, that this isn't a one-off. This isn't how, there is a distinct lacking. But it was fair to say at that point, my self-worth was already non-existent, and I went through the roof. The person at that point that I was in a relationship was, as well, on top of the daily, you're not good enough, you're fat, or look, you're half a woman, you're disgusting, I'm only being kind to you by being with me, you're not worth it, and even once, like, where there was an incident where openly caught cheating, and this is where these people go, is they know that they can groom you to the point, do you accept that? Because the answer back was, well, if you weren't so fat and ugly, I wouldn't have to cheat. And you begin to believe that. And it's not just that you begin to believe that, you end up believing that completely. One of the things I try to talk about this in some ways quite dispassionately. At the same time, you have memories that start floating back to the front of your brain. So you're trying to suppress it. No, this didn't happen. After a particularly bad beating, I couldn't take it anymore. And I tried just to end it. I just couldn't. It wasn't a life. It wasn't it was just nothing. I literally, and I wasn't only just a prisoner in that relationship, I was a prisoner in me. And I was a prisoner in everything that couldn't be sorted and couldn't be done. And I actually, I tried. And it wasn't just I've taken 6 paracetamol. I literally took over 100 painkillers. That it wasn't thing I wanted. At that time, I felt very unfortunate that I didn't, but it was at that time where I was, in a good way, eventually referred to the psychiatric services,
Right.
um, which was actually in Glasgow. Sorry, it was actually in Paisley. And you think, when everything has crashed, you actually think, well, I actually thought, fantastic, I'm getting somewhere. There, I might, I can get out of this. Unfortunately, it wasn't. Now, in the referral, actually, of my notes, because I've seen the letter now, the referral on my notes stated that I had two pre-existing conditions that would cause, even without everything else, even without the background, would have actually caused would cause someone to have major body dysmorphia issues. You were going to have that, and then you add on the sheer level of abuse and everything else. My hope at that point was I'll feel better about myself. In the very first appointment in Paisley, they brought up, have you considered that you might be transgender? I hadn't. By that point, I considered myself to be an extremely ugly, malformed man. A person that really didn't, nothing about me deserved really to have space.
What year would this have been, Peter, around?
It's been around 2003.
Right.
So it goes back quite a while.
Yeah. It's all right. You did a good job. It's really painful.
I said, no, I haven't. We didn't even talk about my past history. I was, I wasn't that old. There'd been years, even prior to me having to be removed and go and live somewhere else. There had been absolute years of physical and mental abuse. Anyway, and in all honesty, the only reason I ended up in that particular relationship was because I was that damaged. That in reality, as I said, I was an open door. Anyone that had come in and been nice to me would have got whatever they wanted. And as well as the previous physical abuse, the previous, there was a long history of sexual abuse from a family member. I thought that was my problem. But then I also didn't think I was any better than that. And that was as good as I was. This is what I deserved. Because that get told to me, not just by one person, but routinely. And it's funny because years later, actually, from that point, I went to the police, and the police took my statements, went to investigate, which I don't believe they did a damn bit of investigating. But one of the things that I had brought up in my statement was that I had been seen at, going back to childhood, I had been seen at 8 different hospitals for injuries, including one of bleeding from the back passage. And the police said they couldn't use that because at 8 years old, I had lied and said I'd fallen down the stairs.
It's unbelievable. Absolutely just awful.
And so when I didn't even bring that up because that goes back to everything.
Yeah.
On where I was at that point.
Yeah.
And I went back and there was no talk about that.
No.
There was no, what's your background at home?
Yeah.
Other than, oh, you live with a partner. That's great. Sitting in front of you with a black eye, but yeah, it was great that I lived with a partner.
So they didn't basically offer you any type of, DBT or anything at all. It was literally just like, let's shove you down a different avenue.
Wait, And the number of times that they referenced things about me to prove that I wasn't suffering from extremely bad depression or anything else, that and they use things. So, like, so you're gay.
Mm.
And at that point, the favourite word was intersex, which is an abhorrent word.
Yes, it is. I agree.
It's an absolutely abhorrent word,
Yeah.
regardless of what condition it refers to. It's dehumanized. It's abhorrent.
Mm.
But so you are intersex, so you're already half female.
Mm.
I wasn't that old.
Mm.
I was extremely, extremely vulnerable.
Mm.
And I didn't have a clue.
Mm.
And at the time, I was like, no, no, I'm not. And I said again, no, I'm not, at the next appointment. In the next appointment, there was a counsellor, and I was like, yay, fantastic, counsellor. No, although not at the time, but the counsellor was well and truly caught up in the you must be transgender.
Right.
At that point as well, obviously when puberty didn't proceed as normal when I was younger, at that point, I was already on testosterone. And
it wasn't a big stretch for them to think, let's just add some other things in here.
One of there's a few things that psychiatrist and that specialist counsellor said that really now that I look back, it gets me so bloody angry. Mm-hmm. One of them was, well, if you were transgender, it's just swapping your hormone. And that's how it was sold. Mm-hmm. It's just swapping your hormone. I believe that. Mm-hmm. And this is what gets me. I believe that. I'm not the only person at that sort of age or an older age that's ever going to come up with that background. Mm-hmm. Having met evil people that will spot someone who's vulnerable 100 miles away, and it gets sold as something as simple as that. I'll go and change my socks tomorrow. Because that's what it is. Now, at the same time, I was getting told by this psychiatrist and counsellor that not only was it that simple, but estrogen would calm my feelings down. It would reduce the internal anger and the at the time the severe depression. It will be relieved as your body starts to change to what it's meant to be. Mm-hmm. And again, that's another one. Them saying what it's meant to be.
And was this being managed by endocrinologists in a specialist clinic by now, or was this still within?
At this point, I was still with psychiatry.
Right.
And this is where, this is one of, and the reason that I spend a bit more time on this when I'm talking to people is because what happened next. Now, at that point, I was referred on to, in Scotland, you get referred on to the gender ID clinic.
Yeah.
And it's meant to go from there. As you know, trans healthcare around the world, in actual fact, is awful. I certainly think there should be a lot more, when everyone's bothering about the GRC bill, getting proper healthcare for people with gender dysphoria is far, far more important than a bill. Because I'm not funny. Look at England. You've got the Tavistock. That hasn't done kids that might or young teenagers with gender dysphoria any good whatsoever. It's not. In Scotland we now have the Sandiford Clinic. So we've got the Sandiford Clinic. It's a wait list. Well, and part of the way this is going, it's a wait list for 5, 6, 7 years. But the problem is, if you're that ill with gender, with and you're so gender dysphoric that you can't cope, or you're like me, who wouldn't have said that I was gender dysphoric, but a psychiatrist and counsellor, they're telling me I am. They're using all these things to prove to me that I am. Then refer you on to a clinic that you're going to wait 5 years for.
Yeah, and meanwhile they basically start fiddling about with hormones within their own speciality.
And ultimately, I couldn't wait because I was that desperate. I hated myself, my body that much that quite literally, if I could have made the chemicals myself, I would have done so. I was desperate. So I paid to be seen privately. I paid to be seen privately. I got my first prescription authorized through a private doctor or a private clinic. I will rephrase and say private clinic, because not everyone that's in these clinics is a doctor.
So is this a one that we know that's talked about a lot on Twitter, or is this one in Scotland that was related to the gender clinic?
It's one of the very few ones that are talked very, very, very much on Twitter.
Right.
I can't name them because of of a legal thing now.
Yeah.
So one of the things that some of these private clinics specialists do is they will gladly refer you back through your own GP for the GP to raise a prescription.
Right. And do the blood monitoring. Right. Okay.
No. And that is another issue. But they don't. I mean, at the time. So, and they actually, it says, or it said certainly back then in their blurb, if your GP won't write a prescription based on what we've written to them, right, we will write you a private one. So you're going to get them. It doesn't really matter whether your GP agrees or not. You're going to get them. But there's no background medical. Right? I had a diagnosis from a psychiatrist and a counsellor, the experts in it all, that I had gender dysmorphia. I was, I should be a woman. So there's no questioning after that. This is what the expert says. Now, bearing in mind, the experts ignored absolutely everything else. They ignored the warning in the referral that I had a pre-existing condition that could cause body, severe body dysmorphic issues, how you feel. That was ignored. So yeah, I ended up, well, hey, you go to them, you go to these, and there are now other private clinics, not just what's worrying is there's not just the ones that you see online or on Twitter. Getting a prescription for hormones, if you have the money, is not hard. And on at least one of them, you initially self-certify that your bloods are fine.
I'm absolutely freaking out as a clinician. At this point, I want you to know that every part of my body is just freaking out at the whole idea that someone with a, complex medical condition wasn't seen or, assessed. So yeah, keep going.
And on at least one of these clinics, then this is I get a lot of hate on Twitter from people who think they're supporting trans rights. And one of the reasons I get it is for saying this. This clinic is actually, if you read through, if you go to it, and there are others, so it's not just one. You actually go and you read some of the blurb of these clinics, but it says, have you had decent bloods done? Do you need them done? Because they'll offer to send you somewhere to get a blood test done. But one of the very first options that they offer you is, have you had blood tests recently, and were they normal? And if you tick that, that's it. They don't ask if you have any other pre-existing conditions. They don't ask what medication you're on.
It's unbelievable. Yeah.
I was coming from a point where I wasn't self-IDing. I was coming from a point where I had given this diagnosis out with my own human opinion. When you get people, and really, and this is why the GRC bill is a waste of time, when we should be concentrating on that there is people who are desperate, there are people that are desperately needing help, and they go, there's these clinics there to support them, and oh, they're so loving and care about you. No, they don't.
I do see, I see a lot of hatred aimed at people with DSDs on Twitter, like a lot. You're especially targeted.
Interestingly, I not look. I was running late back this morning from treatment, and I was. There's nothing else to do when you're sitting during treatment, but you're on Twitter, you're on Facebook, and literally it was like 1 minute, and up pops some ridiculous claim, and the frustration is that the evidence behind these claims is, to all intents and purposes, in reality, excuse my language, bullshit. Now, this claim this morning that had come up was, I trust the scientists that intersex means between two sexes, and that means that there's more than one gender and that there's no binary. And they shared a link, from the scientist. Now, I read it, and apart from my blood pressure climbing as you're doing it, it wasn't from a scientist at all. It was from somebody who, admittedly, 20 plus years ago, studied, according to them, chemistry and biology. They didn't study genetics. They didn't study DSDs or the various.
No, they had an O level essentially. And
effectively in that subject. What they were known for was being the multimillionaire owner of a real estate and also a stem cell market research company.
Right.
Also with they, them in the pronoun.
Of course. Yeah. You can almost discount it from there.
Can. But I read it. And it was. I mean, it was nonsense. Half of it contradicted what we're told every day about how gender is a social construct, and it's not. They say gender, and then it says in this one the exact opposite, that it's not. So it's not. It's not science, and it's not listening to scientists at all.
So
I'm sorry, I'm doing what I normally do, and I go off on tangents.
No, I do it all the time. So you started on these hormones. You weren't having your bloods monitored. And what happened next?
About that time, it was a few weeks, maybe a few months afterward, my also wonderful partner decided that.
It's all right, you're doing a good job. Take your time.
Decided that as I was, his words, half and half, it would be an extremely good idea, not just for him to be able to have a go, but some of his friends. And after my eventual refusal, I was given awful beating that only someone coming to check on me who couldn't get in resulted in an ambulance being called. And by awful beating, he didn't, even when the ambulance people arrived, he wouldn't let them in. Even at that, they were downstairs. They were, the ambulance was downstairs at the door, and he wouldn't actually let them in because it was one of his security systems. He wouldn't let them in. When eventually they got someone else to let them in, I had a punctured lung, various other things, and it was only that, when the police were involved, that I actually left. And it was literally, a much older, lovely lesbian friend that I had, and it was her, and she's like, "You can't keep doing this. Look, look at the mess. And she actually, at that point, she had driven down to Paisley. She packed my clothes and she moved me.
Got you out.
Didn't take, I mean, as a result, was one of the many things I don't have an awful lot of irreplaceable items, but she got me out, and she got me out in my life. And maybe I think it's one of the reasons why, other than the fact that throughout time, lesbians seem to have been the ones in particular that have stuck up for the gay, for the lesbian, gay, bisexual community. They've certainly done it over time, but my experience, my personal experience, is that lesbians are some of the most wonderful people on this earth. And I think it's one of the reasons why I get quite so upset and angry when I see the abuse and the attacks they get and the rewriting that takes them out of our history. And
so she got you out, and then, and at this point you're taking
at this point, I was no longer taking any of the medication connected to
right.
Kleinfelters. I cannot pronounce that word.
Yeah.
And I was taking estrogen. I was taking other stuff as well that was under the prescribed. By which point I was being reviewed under the I was being reviewed under the NHS, but that literally was only because there was no waiting time for me. I was already on, there was already on. So they started the reviews. And it goes back actually to when we go back to these private clinics, both physical and online, where they don't ask about certain medical conditions. Now, I'm pretty sure, actually, I'm not, I don't know what they do now. They certainly know now. They might not have back then. I can't prove that they knew. But there are medical conditions that are, particularly in men, although particularly men that are going to be swapping testosterone for
estrogen.
Yeah. There are conditions that are completely contraindicatory for that to happen. But they're not asked for. And in actual fact, what's more worrying, the NHS in the UK don't routinely test people, even if people. I mean, one of the things, and people that produce autoimmune antibodies.
Yes.
Right. Now,
I know where you're going with this. Yeah.
People know that. Some people manage their whole life without ever knowing that their body produces them, because they don't produce enough of them to make a difference, or the kind of flares that they'll get aren't severe enough to say, or long enough to say, right, I better go to the doctor because I'm feeling tired all the time, or any of the other different symptoms it can feature. Now, even now, it's not routine to test anyone seeking hormones, male or female, to see if they are producing ANAs. And that is horrific.
It is, yeah. Because, carry on.
They don't even ask if you've got a history of it. They ask other questions, or you'll get asked about psychiatric questions, which is partially understandable, and partially, well, maybe if you were supporting that a bit better, I wouldn't be you wouldn't be sitting there talking to them. But they don't. And I've literally now, what I've done is I've gone through, I have a lot of friends with autoimmune conditions as well. They're more in general, autoimmune conditions are more common in women. And they say that they don't 100% know why or the mechanism, but there's fairly evident anecdotal evidence that it's linked to hormones, because if you give estrogen to males, the ratio, in terms of, and there's really good scientific studies out, particularly from Canada of all places, is some brilliant studies that the autoimmune, if you give estrogen, if you puberty block and or you give estrogen to males, the rate of the presence of autoimmune antibodies and autoimmune disease matches biological women. Except it tends to be much more severe. Now, it's an open goal. It's there. And it's not just one. It's not just one. And it's not just a self-reporting system that they've used. They've done the blood tests. They have done studies where they have studied this. It's coming back. It comes back with the exact, the incidence rate comes back exactly the same.
No, I mean, in fact, I think autoimmune hepatitis in women is responsible for over half of all cases of liver failure. And one of the interesting things about, if you look at the literature for estrogen and liver issues, you won't find much written in transgender medicine. So if you just look at it in relation to general hepatology, you'll find much more literature. But obviously they've had such a stranglehold in terms of the cohort studies that have been done. Essentially what they really need to do is a prospective matched long-term cohort study of two populations going forward, looking at these cross-sex hormones. But at the moment, I'm not sure that that's actually taking place. So what happened for you then?
Well, it's not that there hasn't been research done into this. There has been. There's quite a few actually. Unfortunately, there's not as many long-term ones. A lot of them have been done
very short,
or just on the chemistry changes within the blood, as opposed to then going and saying to this person, do you have any symptoms?
Well, they need to look at cancers and heart attacks and liver problems and all the rest of it on a long-term, 10-year, or more follow-up.
Absolutely. And it's nowhere, even now. It certainly wasn't back then, and it certainly isn't now. It is absolutely nowhere do they tell, in particular, the males taking cross-sex hormones, doesn't say it anywhere in any literature. Oh, it'll say you're slightly higher risk of a stroke, and there's 2 or 3 things, but
blood clots and strokes and things like that.
But then it's done as the same type of warning you do when you have to sign to have an operation. There is a 1 in 3 million chance there'll be a complication. It's done like that. But that's not true when it comes to autoimmune. It really isn't. Now, I do. Some people as well don't even know that the condition they have is an autoimmune condition. And that's, I'm finding very interesting. For example, multiple sclerosis is an autoimmune condition. And I've spoken to people with it that didn't actually know that. So it's not a widely known issue. I have to teach people about it, when I'm explaining to, certainly when I explain to friends, but if I'm meeting someone new and there's a question asked, I've got to teach them about what it is.
Yeah, it's not, people don't know much about them generally.
But yet, the production of autoimmune antibodies, whether you have then developed an autoimmune condition, is estimated about 15% of the population. And it doesn't matter how small the percentage is of of transgender people who start taking hormones, that share of the population is still within that group as well. I ultimately became, not evidently so much at first, but I ultimately began developing symptoms. So now, prior to that, I already knew I had an autoimmune disorder, so it wasn't new to me. I'm with people who are telling me that they don't even mention it. They certainly ask, some of the questions they ask you about blood or the tests they do for blood are nothing to do with autoimmune. It's like, it doesn't matter at all. It really, really matters. So I began to lose symptoms, and more and more tired, problems with my joints. One of the problems that I have quite a problem with is ultraviolet light. I will react to ultraviolet light very badly, and that got worse and started getting worse when I was taking hormones. To give you an example, again, at the time, I hadn't equated this all together. But even walking down the street in short sleeves, and my arms would be covered in hives. It would last for a while. Absolutely horrible. But I never put, why is this getting worse? The problem is that ultimately, when I stopped taking the hormones, which wasn't particularly for that reason, but when I stopped taking the hormones, I continued to get worse. That hasn't reversed itself. Upsets me and angers me. I could have an easy life and just go away and not talk about these things. It would certainly give me an awful lot less abuse and death threats. But I can't, because I know what they're coming to in 20, 30 years' time, and it's not pleasant. I have autoimmune hepatitis. I also have autoimmune nephritis. I also have autoimmune issues with my lungs. They can't replace them all. The current amount of damage to the liver is beyond the point that the liver could regenerate itself. Over the last year, I've been really steadily getting very much, I don't think iller is the word, but everything is not right. My immune system now pretty much ignores, if there's an infection going around, my immune system now just is not interested in fighting the infection. But if I catch an infection, it won't fight. It's not interested in infection, but instead it will start attacking me even more. And I didn't know until July, August last year, and I was sent to a hospital, and the specialist turned round and said, well, of course, you know that the reason that you've got the autoimmune hepatitis at your age and as a man is because you took estrogen. You took the estrogen that they promised would sort everything. And I'm seeing, and you see on Twitter, on social media, trans women complaining about pains. And you have the leaders of the trans rights movement who affirm that as being a woman, who affirm these pains and these symptoms as being the equivalent of a period. They're not.
They're smashing such high doses as well.
It's not symptoms of being a woman. They're not. It's not affirmation that they're having a period. It's their internal systems being damaged.
That's why I can't support it, Peter. I cannot, despite the fact I care deeply about people's feelings and their trauma and their pain, I cannot in good conscience get behind this, because I know the damage it's doing to people's bodies. These are not, it's causing deep, deep harm. It's not a normal thing to do to your body. So what have they said about your liver? I mean, have they said that you would be eligible for a transplant, or?
I was eligible for a transplant. I was put on the transplant waiting list. back in September, at which point the experts were pretty much saying we've got 16, 17 months really before there's nothing that can be done. Since then, because of the amount of the autoimmune the nephritis in kidney,
nephrotic kidneys, yeah, right.
They can't replace them all, and if they replace one, how?
And because of, and is it SLE that you have? Right. So, and obviously that's going to have an impact on your ability to manage transplants as well. And you're young. I mean, you look younger than me.
I'm 43, and I can say I'm not going to see 45, because I bought their life. I bought this miracle sunlit uplands. And you actually think, when you're carrying that amount of baggage, that number of violent assaults, sexual assaults, rape, along with the other issues, that sunlit uplands looks like heaven. And I'll admit, I said no and no, and in the end, I took it. Because you believe doctors. You believe professionals.
I know. I know.
And the vast majority of doctors and professionals are brilliant. But when you come across somebody, and it's even ones that are not doctors, any human being that believes fully in you can change sex, you cannot overcome that. That's their belief, and it is a belief. It's not a science. We know you can't change sex. It's not a science, but it's a belief. They sell it. Exactly the same as an estate agent will sell you a house. This is the positive for you. This is the positive for you. And I know that I'm not the only one. I know I'm not the only one now, particularly because of the amount of detransitioners that are now coming forward. But I'm not the only one whose life will be limited because the entire, and I'll say it again, the entire healthcare system around people with body or gender dysmorphia is awful, and it needs fixed. And it's not going to be fixed by Nicola Sturgeon's GRC bill. That's not going to fix it. That's not going to make anyone's life particularly better, especially trans people, if they do not get the background medical care that they need. I'm sorry, it makes me so angry.
And rightly so. Absolutely rightly so.
And I try and speak out. I literally try and speak out. And the problem is, you get the leading trans rights campaigners who will monster you. Now, at one point, I was trying to share what my daily life was like with autoimmune disease, with the autoimmune hepatitis, as well as everything else. Now, bearing in mind what a lot of people don't realize again about autoimmune conditions, when I'm walking, my knees dislocate because that's one of the issues. I have autoimmune arthritis in nearly every joint. The pain, some days, and I'm prescribed controlled painkillers. And the pain some days don't even cover that pain. So I had tried to share this. This is my breakfast is 40 pills.
Mm.
I mean, literally, breakfast is 40 pills. And I tried to share that on why I wanted a pause. I wanted them to stop. For me now, as much as I want particularly is stopping children right back now. The ones that are going on to puberty blockers, you know, that needs stop now.
Mm.
Because it's not, again, it goes back to it's not 100% reversible. But I shared this image, and it got shared quite widely. But then one of the leading trans rights activists shared it with their particular slant on it. Of course, the slant was I was lying, I was making it up to hurt trans people. I was I was a TERF, various other things, but that directed all of their hate at me.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I got hate. Actually, I had to come off social media for a few weeks because I couldn't cope with it.
Mm-hmm.
And we seem to live in an age where there's a large, particular portion of people under the age of 40 who think the most reliable source is Dr. Bloody Google.
Yeah.
So one of the things to come back with, well, I've looked that up. That's just a vitamin pill. That would be a normal supplement for a woman to take. Yeah, I'm not a woman. Mm. I'm having to take folic acid because the damage that the hormones did means my body it just cannot retain the amount it needs. So I end up with folate anemia. You don't generally prescribe folic acid in prescription quantity doses to men. And it goes from there. And the wonderful theories, he's on this particular antibiotic, so he must have a bowel infection. No, just look, that particular antibiotic that I have to take is one that's used to help reduce the amount of toxins in your blood if your liver's not working. No, but they hate. And I've tried to say, I'm not saying that, I'm not hateful. I'm not, certainly not to anyone who's transgender or whose body dysmorphic or dysphoria issues, not at all. And honestly, all I want to do is give them a massive hug and look after them and make sure they get treated better than they're getting treated by medical professionals and the organizations like Stonewall. It's all very well for Stonewall to share tweets and links about this special week and that special week. Apart from that, Stonewall don't do anything. Right? They certainly don't do anything for anyone with a DSD.
And I think that that's the important thing. Is to really to block all of these sort of individuals, but really to focus your energies on sort of working strategically with the kind of the DSD powers to try and scrub this whole concept of the intersex for the nonsense that it is, because there's a lot of people now working and doing great work, and also convincing the people on your side, like people, me and some of the people who might watch this, and educating them and allowing us to work on your behalf too, because the power of your testimony is so incredibly moving, and honestly, thank you so much for sharing it, Peter. I know that people are going to be so incredibly moved to hear it, and I think that it's possibly wise to take a bit of time out after we put this out onto YouTube and onto Twitter. I just want to say thank you for coming and telling your tale. I'm really grateful.
You did mention there about people on our side with the intersex issue. That is something that I don't think people realise. that every day I will see a comment from someone who I agree with 99.9% of the things, but saying things like, oh, we don't want anything to do with the TQI because they're homophobic and hate us. The I, I'm sure there will be some people with a DSD that are homophobic. Absolutely not. No, we don't even want to be there. And by putting it in, that's also been reinforced.
That's what they need to. That's this the body of work, isn't it? They need to be consistently saying that we need to also be working to get rid of the I out of that. And I think that a lot of people are doing that. Certainly, I know a lot of people are aware, but I think I do see a lot of hatred targeted towards people with DSDs. I'm not entirely sure what the answer is.
As I said in a conversation recently with someone, there's an awful lot of unintended consequences that are only now just beginning to come to light. And that's going to continue. That's going to continue.
Well, on that note, I think we should wrap it up. And thank you again, Peter. Thank you.
Thank you.